Welcome back. Well, joining us now, Jared Creed, Mike North, to talk about the markets. Jared, you're in Iowa. I want to start with you because coming up on Tuesday will mark the 1-year anniversary of the derecho. You work with a lot of producers in that area. You live in Iowa. How do crop conditions look this year compared to what happened last year in August?
Well, the world's much different, not only from a standpoint of the derecho a year ago, but the spring planting conditions that the majority of the state experienced this year is night and day different than the years prior. I would say, as the most part, we're off to one of the better starts in the state of Iowa that we've had for several years, albeit Mother Nature can still throw plenty curveballs at us. I'd say the optimism level from the farmer is very high west of 35 and east of I-35, maybe a few question marks depending on what kind of weather comes our way for the next 30 to 60 days. In fact, this weekend's weather pattern that potentially can come into northeast Iowa will be a big game changer, whether we see crop conditions slide further or if we actually start to maintain and maybe even look to see some increase in yield potential at least in my backyard in a 100-mile radius.
Yeah, Mike, I mean, in Wisconsin, that was an area that really couldn't catch a rain when you talk about the beginning of the growing season. And now looking at crop conditions when it comes to like soybeans, some of the best crop conditions that we're seeing in the country actually set in Wisconsin.
Yeah, it was a really, really odd mix of weather this year. We had a very, very dry and hot June. We were very concerned about our crop as we headed into July, and everything has changed. Even as I walk my fields, I can tell you that the crop report I'd give you today is far more optimistic, far more cheery than the one I would have given you back in June. That condition really could change, though, if August got really, really hot and dry. We're still needing some rain to kind of nurse us along. We've been getting it, which is why the conditions have improved so much. And I think the way things look right now with the rain over the next few days, that should help us really put some finish to this and help things move towards pretty good yield in Wisconsin.
Well, speaking of yields, Jared, I mean, we're coming up next week. We're going to see USDA release the next report. Typically in August, we see USDA go out in fields and kind of take some yield samples. Did away with that recently. And so what are your expectations when it comes to this next report from USDA as far as yield and production goes?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. I think this is our third year that we don't have the objective yield plot data from the actual USDA plots. So you're heavily dependent on survey results and at the same time heavily dependent on satellite data. Personal opinion, I don't think you're going to see a lot of wiggle room in the yield here in August. Most of the focus will be on the August WASDE. Shouldn't have a lot of focus from the demand side. The demand side should really get more attention into September and October after the September quarterly stocks report. At this point in time, I don't feel that you're going to see much of a yield change in beans. And if anything, I think you can maybe see a corn yield move a bushel either way, not necessarily suggesting that, we're going to start a trend to start moving that yield lower. It's a story of have and have-nots. Just depends where you're at in the U.S. The South and the Delta looks to be very good. That area can certainly help offset some of the problems in South Dakota, North Dakota, and Minnesota. And not all of those areas are in trouble as well. And then obviously the core of the Corn Belt being Iowa, Nebraska, Illinois, and southern Minnesota. Collectively, I think those four have a very high likelihood of achieving a trend plus yield at this point in time.
Yeah, we'll get into the demand picture coming up on U.S. Farm Report. But Mike, when it comes to actually crop production and some of the changes, what do you expect from USDA this next round?
I don't know. I don't expect any changes on soybeans as we go through this August number. Corn is going to be the one to watch, and because we don't have that objective field data, it's going to be difficult for them to likely make a whole lot of changes to the number as we come through the August report as well. We're probably going to have to wait to find that later as we start to get into a little bit more, real objective view of the crop, combine reports or otherwise. But I wouldn't expect a lot of change in the August report. I know there's been a lot of surveys coming out, that are touching that 176 or somewhere close to that. I would tend to agree with that as we look at final yields to, what Jared said, that, we do have the haves and have-nots this year. And it's a matter of trying to figure out where we're going to be, but to say that we're going to have a trend line yield, which is essentially a 3 bushel better yield than the all-time record, it's kind of a tough stretch given the hardship that's faced in the northern and western part of the Corn Belt.
Well, it seems like it's turned into the haves and have-nots when it comes to demand as well. We will get into that later on U.S. Farm Report.